Hey, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Mafia Meta, starring Carlton and Unctious. And they are here to tell us how to be a better town.
Yay.
What's going on? All right, so Carlton, you had a few
Uh,
things in your head that you kind of wanted to get out, and a lot of them talked about last week. If you weren't around for last week, a quick recap of game number two, which is what we're drawing a lot of the stuff from, was I ended up faking cop. The real cop was alive and had just checked me, so he knew I was Mafia, and then he didn't come out at all. He ended up dying, and that was it. And then, like, it was this long, drawn-out game of town kind of eating out of the palm of my hand when they shouldn't have been. They should have held me accountable for all the shit that was happening. And I didn't die at all. Mafia never killed me, but there was no medic in the game whatsoever, so it didn't make sense that Mafia wouldn't have killed me. So that's like the short version of what happened, and I think we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about the
yeah.
specifics of what went wrong. What went wrong?
What went wrong? Yeah. So the first topic I want to talk about is when to talk and when not to talk. So I'll take the second half of that first. When not to talk. Um, you don't want to talk when you're going to screw something up for town. Like you don't want to try and out somebody. Like now, it's one thing to call for somebody like, oh, like I think that if we have a cop at this point, they should come out. That's a completely different thing. Because sometimes it's a valid strat. Like sometimes the cops should come out, sometimes they shouldn't. But your opinion of whether or not they should come out sometimes can actually be valuable to town. Now, what you don't want to do is you don't want to say, "Oh wow, they just said that I think that they're cop," or "Oh, they just said that I think that they're medic," because that is just not good for anybody. Because on the off chance that Mafia didn't hear it, you're now reinforcing it for everybody in the group to hear.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a great example of when not to talk. Now, the other thing is there's a big difference between talking and contributing. And I think that one of the things that we've been getting into with a lot of our games is, we say, oh, well, you're not talking, and we force people to talk, but they don't really have anything to say. So they just kind of ramble on about nothing for 5 or 10 minutes. And that's one of the reasons we're getting a lot of like hour and a half days, is because people are saying things, but they're not actually, it doesn't mean anything. It's all just nonsense.
Yeah, it's. I posted a link in chat to a picture of Ryan that somebody made. It was talking exactly about this. But I think one of the biggest things the biggest ways that you can see if somebody's actually town is if they're truly engaged in what's happening. When you're engaged, you're making a point of thinking about each person and their relations between each other, and really you're trying to discern something from their behavior, the things that they're saying, whatever the things they're saying are, and how they're interacting with other players. And if you're not paying attention to that, you might be Mafia, because you might not be engaged in the conversation at hand. You might be thinking about, oh well, who should I kill, or something else going on. Like Shindig's, for example, he's a pretty good example. When he's Mafia, he generally kind of checks out of the conversation. He's kind of like nonchalant about everything that's happening. That's one way to tell that he might be Mafia. But more important than that, if you're not engaged in the conversation, then you're a bad town, and it just makes it harder for anyone to be able to get a read off of you, or lynch the actual Mafia members.
Yeah. So like one thing like that I'd love to see moving forward, like in the meta of the game, is that everybody wants to win games. Like everybody wants to win games. Like it's always great to win, but at the same time, like you can't always you can't sacrifice the current game like for the long term. And it's been brought up before, but you have to play every single game as the best town player you can be. Even if you're Mafia, like you have to play every single game as the best town player you can be. So if you have information, like you need to get it out there. Like, oh, I didn't want to speak over anybody is not an excuse. There's always an opportunity to get your opinion out there, to get your views out there. So you want to make sure you're talking at the same time. I really don't have as much of a problem anymore, like lynching somebody if they're not contributing. And there's still the difference between like the talking and the contributing. But if I'm in a situation where I have two people and I say this person might be Mafia, but they're contributing, and this person might be Mafia, but they're not contributing, I'm not going to feel bad anymore about lynching the person that's not contributing. I'm not even going to really try as hard to get information out of that person. I'm just going to get them out of the game, and they're going to learn the hard way that they need to start stepping up, because
Right.
It hasn't worked. Like we go after the same people every single week and say, you need to do this, and they just don't do it. So something has to change, and that's kind of the step that I want to see taken going forward as far as that goes. And I think that it's gonna throw some games in the beginning. I think that it's gonna increase the Mafia win rate for a little bit, but I think it's gonna equalize out at the end.
Yeah, I was talking to Neil and I think Shindig's about this, a very similar topic, and I was saying, would it be bad play to just start lynching the people that aren't actually contributing at all? And they said no. It's you take a hit in the beginning so that ultimately it'll be a bigger payoff. You'll end up with better games and you'll end up with town winning more because you have to kind of like train and meld people into a mode where they're actually going to be able to play a game of Mafia as opposed to just talking out of their ass constantly. I mean, I totally do that sometimes. Like I'm a commentator. Like what my mind does is it goes into verbal vomit mode when I'm put on the spot. Like that's something that I'm almost like partially trained to do. Like how many words can I say? And if that comes off in game, then that's it's just bad Mafia play in general. So I agree with that. And there was something I wanted to pick your brain about, and I don't remember what it was. Oh, as far as people not contributing, you, for instance, Carlton, tend to be quieter early on in the game. But the things that you do say tend to be actual contributions. But we seem to have this sort of mindset of players who are good, who generally are strong late game, we don't pick as hard and prod as hard at early game. Do you think that that's an acceptable way to play? Like, can a player truly earn their right to be quiet early on?
I don't think so. I think I'm definitely guilty of taking advantage of that. Mm-hmm. Not because I want to necessarily be quiet, but when I'm quiet the way I'm quiet, I'm able to pay a lot more attention to what's going on than when I'm trying to think of what I want to say and how to say it. Because I'll definitely throw out stuff. Like I'll definitely put out information, like I think good, valid information into the game. But at the same time, I try and do it in a way that either, like, if I have, like, really good leads, I'm like, I'm really feeling good about this game. I think that this person, this person, this person are all Mafia, and I'm, like, pretty solid on it. I'm going to try and do it in a way that I'm not coming out so hard against them, like, right off the bat, that it's going to make me a target that I'm going to die the next night. Mm-hmm. And it's good and it's bad that I do that, because I feel that, like, part of it's, like, kind of like this, like, thing where it's like, well, I'm like, I think that I'm going to be more valuable than this other person going in. Yeah. So I'd rather be in the game like another day, so I can be more effective. But at the same time, like that information should get out there, and I have to be more careful about, or I have to be better at getting more information out. Like even if it is going to cost me, because right. at this point, I'm an early target anyway. If I don't die first night, I die the second night. Like I don't make it past that anymore. Like it's just so I need to try and get that information out there.
And it's particularly tough in games like without medics, which we've kind of been leaning towards playing recently.
Yeah.
A medic isn't going to be able to save those high-profile players that are worth keeping around, whether or not they're Mafia.
Yeah. And then, so kind of like ties into all this is the time limit thing. I know some people like time limits, some people don't. I like time limits, but I don't think it's ever been beneficial to our games the way we play. Yet. I think that it can be. And I think that the way to get it there is if we can get through with all this stuff where people are playing better, they're saying things that mean something, we cut down on all the nonsense, I think that time limits will be very valid.
Right.
But as it stands right now, we get in the situation where it's okay that we have a 30-minute round, and every time we start going on somebody who's Mafia, they manage to deflect it off to somebody else and just keep us going back and forth long enough that it gets down to like 29 minutes, and they're okay, you have a minute left, you have to go on somebody, and they manage to just get that on a townsperson.
I think it's interesting.
It's a good strategy as Mafia to do, but we need to stop letting that happen.
Right, yeah. I think what's interesting, though, is while you bring that up, and while a lot of Mafia players, I think we've seen Mafia players do that for sure. I think in my experience in the time limit games that we've had so far, like the town was doing a really good job of keeping track of what the time is and trying to move through people relatively quickly to try to garner as much information as possible. And when the time limit was coming near, we didn't feel that rushed because we knew that, all right, we're going to decide on somebody 3 minutes ahead of time so that we can put them on, we can formal them and then actually get a good vote off. So it kind of depends on the players and depends on what's going on. It's really, really kind of context sensitive. But it's that fear that constantly makes you. It's the fear of that happening. Mafia members stalling long enough. Like Shindig's can do that for days. Like he can stall for days if he wants to. He's gotten pretty good at that. But it's that fear that'll keep you from kind of instating time limits. I know you wanted to talk about tunnel vision, right?
Yeah. So another thing that we've been seeing like happen lately is like this tunnel vision, where somebody gets an idea in their head, like first day, like beginning of the first day, and they don't let it go the entire game. Like it'll be like the fourth day, and they're still like drilling somebody, even though that person's changed. Like they still, it's like no, and sometimes it's not even you. Sometimes it's somebody else said something, and like this happened last week in game 2 where I was suspicious of something Rybo was doing at the start of the game. And I actually lost that suspicion completely by the end of the first day. But because I never said, like, oh, well, I'm not suspicious of him anymore, like, Kimball was like, through the rest of the game, I'm still suspicious of him because Carlton was suspicious of him, and I know that Carlton was town, so now I'm suspicious of Rybo, and he, like, couldn't drop it the whole game.
Right.
Even though at that point Rybo had been, like, super pro-town, to the point that even if he was Mafia, he was being so good, you need to let it off of him for a minute and go after somebody else.
Right.
So you can't get stuck in this rut where you're just like you're consistently going after somebody. Like the game evolves, so you have to evolve with it. Like it's going to change as the game goes on.
Right. And now you're a player who tends to take notes, so it's interesting that you say that. Like you can kind of track the evolution of the game as things are happening. So I guess somebody from chat asked, what do you actually keep track of on your piece of paper? Is that something you're willing to open up? Is that something you're willing to talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I actually have like notes from Monday, like right here. Like the biggest things that I think is important to take notes on, like the biggest thing overall is the vote. It's really important to know who voted on lynchings, because it's the most relevant information you're going to get unless you're a cop. Whether Mafia is trying to like protect somebody, or whether they're trying to kill somebody, or whether people are voting late, or who's voting for everybody, or who's voting for nobody. Like that's the most relevant information in the game that you're going to get, other than somebody just totally slipping up.
It forces somebody to take a side. You have to take a side. You can no longer waver. You can't just sit there and say, "Oh, well, I don't know." You have to.
Yeah, because guess what? Like if you're playing a game and it's like the third day and you've already had like eight to 10 lynches go through on the game. No, if you're not taking notice, you're not going to remember who voted for who. Like you might remember somebody in particular if you have a suspicion of them, but you're not going to remember like, okay, well, this person didn't vote 8 lynches ago. And then if you ask, like, okay, well, like who voted for this person? And like it's like, okay, well, Mafia wanted to kill them, so who are the people that voted? Like, do you really expect everybody in Mafia to be, oh yeah, I totally voted to kill that townsperson? No, it's not going to happen. They're going to try and get away with it. So you have to be able to make sure that they don't get away with it. And even if you're Mafia, like you write that stuff. I write down the same things whether I'm Mafia or town. And when people say something like, "Oh, well, Carlton always writes down notes," like even if I'm Mafia, I let it slide. I just let the comment go through without challenging it for gameplay. But at the same time, like either way, you have to be playing the best game possible. And even if you're Mafia, you should always be playing as town, just 99% town, not 100% town.
Yeah, right.
So like that's the biggest thing is the votes. I also like to write down who formals somebody. I like to write down, if I can, who initiated the formal. Because sometimes somebody will call a formal, but they're not the one that initiated it. And we figured out, we were talking about this actually Monday after the game, was that a lot of times Mafia can get away with coercing somebody else into formaling for them. So it keeps all the heat off of them, puts the heat on the townsmen for formaling, and they just like wipe their hands clean of it. So I like to write down who's going after who's defending who's deflecting. And then I'll put like a line next to things if it's more important than other things. Those are like the main things like that I'll write down.
I have this picture of like a web in like a drawing. It's like it can get so complex sometimes. Like different people kind of like creating different circles, or when you have 2 circles, but then there's like 2 people in the middle that kind of mix and go in between them both. Like I just imagine it as this giant network, and it'd be interesting to see who kind of. I mean, not that I think anybody was ever going to go into this much detail and statistics, but to see who usually teams up, who are the people that people most trust a lot of the time. I think that'd be pretty cool.
No, it would be, absolutely. One thing I try to avoid doing on my notes, though, is forming circles. I'll make notes of who's defending who's attacking who, but I don't do these, Bregor notes where it's like, well, I have, this person and this person can't both be Mafia. And, like, it goes through, like, 6 pairs of people that I think is completely bogus information. I don't know if he just does it when he's Mafia, because I know he does it when he's Mafia, but our group is too good. Like you can't make these associations anymore of this person wouldn't attack this person if they were both Mafia.
Yeah, no,
because it happens too often. So I don't like circles as much as just picking people individually and you can give reasons why you pick them. But I don't like the idea of circles. I think that circles of trust, I think, are pretty bogus.
Flawed.
Also,
Kind of a
like
flawed thing.
a circle of trust is a good thing that you want to have, but I don't see how that information is going to be valid to anybody else other than if you pick. All you can gauge from a circle of trust really is if somebody admits their own circle of trust is like if you think that they're defending Mafia or protecting or attacking their own Mafia.
Right. What kind of signs do you think happen to kind of I guess how do I phrase this question? How can you tell that someone's trying to control your vote, or how can you tell that somebody's trying to kind of convince you of something? Are there any? I guess what I'm trying to say is outside of actually saying, hey, you should vote for this person because blank, what kind of little manipulative things can you see happening in the game? You're talking a lot about people like coercing another townsperson to actually formal. What kind of like what are giveaways? What are dead giveaways that you might be able to see as a townsperson?
The biggest dead giveaway is that I think is if direction's going towards somebody and then somebody singles you out to ask you about that person. Because, things are kind of like Mafia is going to wait until they can pounce on things. Like, you don't necessarily want to be the first one to go after somebody. But if you can wait until the town's kind of leaning one way and then get the town to go after them. So, like, you'll be like, okay, like, well, let's say we're playing in, like, that game. Richard's name got mentioned a lot.
Yeah.
And you can, as Mafia, you can, like, go to somebody who's town and be like, like, what do you think about Richard? Like, he's, like, everybody thinks he's, like, guilty. Like, would you be comfortable, like, do you think we should throw a formal on him? Like, and then like, yes, you're like, if you're town and you're going after somebody who's Mafia and you're trying to think if they would formal them, like, I don't think that's as good of a strategy as if you're Mafia trying to get town to formal somebody by planting that idea in their head.
Right.
And a lot of times, like, a lot of times that's how it works. It's like you ask somebody, like, like there's a difference between asking somebody for reads and asking somebody for how they feel about a particular person. I think that if we can get to the gameplay where I'd like to get to, where people just say what they think, and they have conviction behind it. I don't think we have to get to that point where like, well, what do you like? Unctious claim cop. Carlton? What do you think about that? Because I already would have said what I thought about that instead of waiting for somebody to ask me. And that doesn't allow if you say what you think without before somebody can ask you, you're not letting Mafia plant that idea in your head.
So okay, so you have this vision of what you think good Mafia play is and what Mafia play should be. Now, there's also other styles of play that kind of deviate from yours, or what somebody else thinks is a more efficient, better way of playing. How do you think these kind of strategies usually kind of like bump into each other, and does it ultimately end up with like less efficient play because there's so many different minds kind of coming together? Can you always meet in the middle? Is it possible to meet in the middle when you're playing Mafia?
I think that the key as Mafia is to play one way 80% of the time and play a different way 20% of the time. Like you can't you always want to play a pretty consistent game, but the way you play it can be different. You have to. It's just...
Is Carlton cutting out for anybody else?
Yeah, I can't hear Carlton either. He completely died.
His shit came unplugged.
Okay, well, that was awesome. Is it back?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay,
you're back.
Cool. So I was saying, like, you have to kind of play Mafia like you would play poker. You have to be aware of what your tells are. You have to be able to change and manipulate your tells while still playing the same, like knowing how to play the game. So you want to play as town, but you want to be able to allow things to happen. I guess actually no, that's where the difference would be. Some games you can play and you can allow things to happen. Some games you can play and you can force things to happen. And I think that would be the best way to differentiate your play as a Mafia player while still being able to be pro town.
Mm-hmm. So when do you think? I don't know. Never mind. Fuck that question. Let's go to a couple chat questions that we have here. Question is, let's do it. What do you think about hand raising? I don't know if I like hand raising. I don't know if I'm big on hand raising. I think I get the most reads when people are kind of clashing over each other, and you can see who's kind of pulling attention away from who, and who is trying to talk over another person. Because a lot of times somebody will be speaking, and if a Mafia member doesn't really like what they're saying, they'll just immediately try to like get involved on top of that. And I think there's a lot to be said about that style of play, and a lot a lot that can be read out of those kinds of reads, as opposed to everybody just stopping, letting somebody with their hand raised go, and then let the next person go. I feel like I get more out of the disordered than I do out of the orderly.
Yeah, I think that you should interject when it's relevant to the current conversation, and I think you should raise your hand when you want to change the conversation. I think that would be like a decent way to go about that, because like you don't want to interject and like completely change the topic, because that's like definitely like unless you're like people are going on about something and you're cop and you want to be like no, stop talking, I need to bring up this really valid important information. Like if people are talking about this, like let them talk about it. Don't be like no guys, you have to stop talking about that because I want to talk about this person now. Like let that conversation run its course. If you have something to contribute to that conversation, like throw it in there. But if you want to just be like, no, I have something else I want to bring up, I think that's where the hand raising might be valid.
And that's actually where time limits get scary too, because when there's time limits going on, you don't want to sit there so long that you're sitting on a conversation and then actually miss your opportunity to say anything because you have 5 minutes left and you need to start formaling people.
Yeah, always write it down, like on something like that. If you're already taking notes and you want to say something, write down what you want to say, because a lot of times you're going to get distracted and you're actually going to forget it.
Oh, that happens to me all the time. I have a terrible, terrible memory. Let's see. Is there a good way to control players from using anger to try and lend credibility to their own town status? Interesting. That's an interesting question, right? So one of the things Ryan said about me when I play is that I have a flair for the dramatic. I mean, I'm in the public speaking club. I'm a commentator, so I think I've taken acting classes in the past. So I think my tendency is to try to emote as much as possible. And so when someone's getting really angry and they start yelling a lot of times that can be convincing, because like, oh, why would you be getting so upset over this if you weren't town or something like that? How do you curb that from happening, Carlton?
How do you curb it from happening?
Or how do you control players from using anger to lend credibility?
I think that you have to, like, I don't think you should ever allow anger in the game. Like, we've had some games that have gotten heated to the point where it's gotten pretty close to personal, if not actually gotten personal.
Yeah.
The game should never ever get to that point. It's still just a game. I think that conviction, though, is very important to the game, and conviction is what can save you on a defense if you're town. Conviction is what can convince people if you're mafia. Like, conviction is a completely valid part of the game, and that's something that everybody should be using in their disposal. Like, I'll say, like that's one of the worst things. Like, if you get accused, like let's say you're mafia and you get accused, or your town you get accused like by somebody who says they're cop, and you don't have conviction. You're just like, well, no, like I think he's, it happened the other day. Like, I think he's fake cop. Well, no, like if I get called out, no, no, like you are not the real cop, because I am town. I know you're not the real cop. Like, you're a fake cop. You're fake claiming. I don't care what else you said. Like, you have to get vocal about it. You have to get angry to sell your story one way or the other.
Yeah, I mean, how much rhetoric can you allow, though? Like, when the time comes that people are like completely yelling over each other, I'm reminded of Shindigs and Peter going after each other pretty intensely, which was awesome, by the way. I loved every bit of it. How much of that can you allow? And on the other hand, is it ever better as a town person to just try to talk over somebody that you know is mafia? If you're the sheriff and you want, you don't want the other town to listen to what the confirmed mafia in your mind is saying, how can you do that?
Here's why I don't think that's a good idea. Is because if you're sheriff and you know somebody's mafia, you want to know what they're going to say. So if you can find a way to like discount everything they're saying while still being able to take it in yourself, I think it's valid. But otherwise, like, you need that. Like, if you know somebody's mafia, you need that information out there one way or the other, whether they're trying to protect somebody or deflect or whatever it is. Like, you need that information. I think that the conviction is fine until it gets to that point where it crosses the line, and that line's probably different for different people that play.
Right.
I think that until you're getting nasty, I think it's a valid strategy one way or the other.
Right.
And I'd lean towards allowing it more than getting rid of it.
Yeah. Like you said, when it starts getting like super personal, that's kind of where you want to start cutting it off a little bit. Why is Carlton cool as shit?
I don't know.
All right.
I just try and play a good game.
I just try to play a good game, man. That's it. If someone talks a lot of shit, do you consider them being the same as if they didn't talk at all? That was we kind of talked about that earlier. I think we're gonna start not allowing that.
Yeah. Like, you just have to, like, we just have to get better at like recognizing when somebody's doing that and just like shutting it down right away. It's important to get reads off people, but if you know they're not saying anything, just don't let it happen.
What are good ways to help you talk, or to be able to talk more, like to get yourself to be able to talk more? That's kind of just, you got to feel out a conversation, right? Start getting involved in what's happening. That's the bottom line. If people are talking about something, take it in, synthesize it, and then try to project what you think about it. Like you can't be completely ignoring everything that everybody's saying, or else you're not playing Mafia at all. Like you're sitting there and you're a waste of space.
Yeah, I mean, if you have reads, like that's something to talk about. And if you don't have reads, find a way to get them. And that gives you something to talk about.
Definitely. I think we got about 5 minutes left. I haven't been reading chat. I've been focusing on getting the questions by Neil. What did we miss anything that you wanted to talk about? I know you talked about things not to say. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, yeah, the one thing I definitely wanted to bring up was the point that it's never too late, right?
Oh,
like
right,
when you're playing the game, it's the game's the game's not over until it's over. So never let yourself get to this point where you're like, well, Mafia's already won. They've already defeated us. So good game to you guys. I'm going to give up now and just let you go.
You got to pull out the box strats.
I've tried to use that as Mafia before, like as a strategy to try and seem like I'm defeated and I can't really contribute much more when I'm actually just trying to put off the game and let something that I want happen. But like the game's not over, and like something that happened in Game 2 last week was that it was stated, well, after a game with no medic and somebody claims cop and has been let live for 3 nights when there's no medic in the game, which should never, ever, ever, ever happen. Even if you're Mafia, you don't let that happen. You kill the cop because there's no medic in the game.
It's not worth the chance. It's not worth the chance.
It's not worth the chance. So when that happens and somebody says, well, if he's fake claiming cop, that means that he's misled us this entire way. So we might as well keep going in this direction. Like
as if to say, I don't know, like as if to say we're gonna get more wet going backwards than we would going forwards.
Yeah, like the game is never over. If you get to this point, even like at that point, like that game was still absolutely winnable for Town. That game was absolutely winnable for Town. Unctious checks didn't make sense. He got called out on it. Rybo was onto him so hard. Rybo was onto Ryan because of their association together. Rybo asked people, what do you feel? Like, do you feel that Unctious and Ryan could both be Mafia? And nobody could get over this fact that, like, well, I think he's the cop because Mafia let him live 3 nights in a row for meta play. Like, if people would take a step back and say, look, you know what? There's no situation where that's a good meta play. I think that it's very possible his checks don't make sense. He never defended Richard like the first day when people were going after him, yet he said that he checked him. He checked Jason after he said that he thought he was totally Town. Like, it just doesn't add up. And you start back and you're thinking back and you say, okay, you know what? I think Unctious is fake cop.
Yeah.
Let me put some weight into what Rybo said about how him and Ryan have been in it together from the beginning. I think they're both Mafia. Well, there you just got 2 Mafia out of the 3 that are still in the game. And then you're in a much better position. Now, Alan, I mean, the plan that they all came up with together, like Alan's play to go against Tom so hard was a really good play. But at the same time, it was almost too good to the point that he was the only one that was doing it. And like, there's the problem where he really slipped up was that he's
sticking out like a sore thumb at that point.
He's sticking out like a sore thumb, but he backed up Ryan. And if he was so convinced that Unctious was cop, or that Unctious was fake cop, he shouldn't have been backing up Ryan. And that's where you can kind of like, that's where like you have a chance. No, it was unlikely, even if they had gotten Unctious and Ryan out, like the chances of them figuring out Alan were very slim, but there was a chance. So the game's never over. Don't say that, well, we've already been misled this far, so let's just keep going in this direction. No, you stop, you turn around, and you try and win the game.
Yeah. I think what's interesting though is if they had decided to kill me or to lynch me and they ended up killing Ryan as well, they'd also have to accept the fact that my reads, all the people that I exonerated, who were Town members by the way, would also be likely to be Mafia, which is I think is an interesting thing to think about. Like suddenly all my reads go out the window when you think about the idea that, well, this guy is probably Mafia at this point. So,
well, then you just have, I mean, at the same time, you just have to think about that. Like in any situation, especially when we play, it can go either way. You can be defending your own Mafia, you can be defending Town.
Yeah.
You have to read the situation every single time differently.
All right, I think our time's just about up.
Yeah.
So, any last words? Any final thoughts?
I mean, I covered pretty much most of the stuff that I wanted to talk about.
Cool.
Let's see. I'm just trying to see if there's anything like in here. I mean, as far as the cop claims, if somebody claims and somebody counterclaims, um, sometimes it's important. Like sometimes there are games where it's a good idea to leave both people that claimed in the game. Sometimes it's not. Like you have to read. It's very circumstantial on the game, and it's hard to really. It's hard to have a hard and fast rule on that.
All right, cool.
So
Well, that is our Mafia Meta show for you guys tonight. We're going to take the stream down for just a moment while we set up Mafia, and we will be right back. Let's everyone give a big round of applause to Carlton and Unctious for teaching us how to be better town, because
raise your salties.
We could use it. We could use it.
Raise your salties.
Raise your salties, everyone. All right. See you guys shortly.